A drug rehabilitation program in 1950, California became so effective, so beloved, so convinced of its own righteousness, that it declared war on the outside world. Most of us think cults start with a charismatic messiah, a man with hypnotic eyes who draws vulnerable people into a compound, isolates them and slowly rewires their minds. We've seen it before. Jim Jones, David Koresh, and that narrative, it's comforting in a way. It lets us believe cults are obvious, recognizable, easy to spot before they metastasize, but Synanon didn't work that way, and that's precisely what made it so dangerous. In 1958, a former jazz musician named Chuck Dederich opened a small house in Santa Monica. He called it Synanon, a nonsense word he'd made up. The premise was radical for its time, a drug rehabilitation program run not by doctors or priests, but by former addicts themselves. No pharmaceutical intervention, no 12-step surrender to God, just raw human honesty in a living room. People confronting each other's lies until the lies cracked. And it worked. I've read the case studies myself, men and women with decades of heroin addiction, people the medical establishment had written off as hopeless stayed clean. They stayed for months, years, they built lives. The waiting list grew. Judges started referring defendants to Synanon instead of prison. Celebrities donated money. By the mid-1960s, Synanon wasn't just a rehab center anymore. It was a movement, a model. A proof of concept that human willpower, channeled correctly, could overcome anything. But here's where the accepted story breaks, because success for Synanon didn't feel like enough anymore. Around 1968, something shifted in Chuck Dederich's thinking. He began to believe that Synanon wasn't just a treatment program, it was a superior way of living, that the outside world, with its lies and compromises and addictions, was fundamentally sick, and that Synanon had the cure. Members began living on the property full-time. They donated their paychecks. They cut off contact with family members who didn't embrace the program. The daily encounter groups, those brutally honest conversations that had healed so many, became something else. Weapons. Dederich would sit at the center, orchestrating public humiliations. I've read the accounts. Members were forced to shave their heads. Couples were separated on his whim. Dissent wasn't tolerated, it was crushed. By the early 1970s, Synanon had grown to nearly 1,000 members across multiple locations. They had businesses, a janitorial service, a bookstore, a gas station. They had money, and they had something more dangerous, absolute conviction that they were right and everyone outside was wrong. The first cracks in the public narrative came from journalists. In 1977, a Los Angeles Times reporter named Dale Scott began investigating Synanon's finances and practices. He published a series of articles questioning the organization's methods. Dederich's response wasn't legal. It wasn't rational. It was a declaration of war. Synanon leadership created what they called the Imperial Marines, a paramilitary force within the organization. They began a campaign of intimidation against critics. Journalists received death threats. Lawyers who represented people suing Synanon found their homes vandalized. One reporter's car was firebombed. This wasn't metaphorical. This was actual terrorism. The most infamous incident happened in October 1978. A man named Paul Morantz, an attorney who'd successfully sued Synanon on behalf of former members, found a 4-foot rattlesnake in his mailbox. Not a picture of a snake, an actual venomous reptile. Someone had decapitated it and placed it there as a message. Morantz survived. The message didn't need to be subtle. Synanon had crossed into open violence. Law enforcement finally moved. In 1978, federal and state agents raided Synanon compounds. They seized weapons, guns, explosives, and detailed hit lists. They found records of planned attacks on specific individuals. The organization that had started as a beacon of redemption was revealed to be a domestic terrorist cell. Here's where the real explanation emerges, the thing that separates Synanon from every other cult we think we understand. Synanon didn't start as a con. Dederich wasn't a fraud. He genuinely believed in what he was building. The rehabilitation model worked. People got clean. That success became the problem. When an organization becomes convinced it has found the answer, when it works, when people testify to its power, when society starts to validate it, the next step is almost inevitable. The organization begins to see itself as separate from society, above it, immune to normal rules because it's pursuing a higher good. Dederich didn't invent this psychology. It's in every utopian movement that turned violent. The tragedy isn't just the violence Synanon committed. It's the thousands of people who genuinely recovered from addiction inside those walls. Their redemption was real. Their transformation was genuine. But the organization that enabled that recovery also became their prison. And eventually it became something far worse. Synanon was prosecuted. Dederich pleaded no contest to charges related to the violence. The organization was dismantled, but the damage extended far beyond the courtroom. Hundreds of former members spent years recovering not just from addiction, but from the psychological trauma of having been part of something they believed in that turned monstrous. What Synanon teaches us is this: the most dangerous organizations aren't the ones that start evil. They're the ones that start pure, achieve real success, and then mistake their success for moral authority. They believe they've transcended normal ethics because their mission transcends normal concerns. That's when idealism becomes fanaticism, when healing becomes harm. I've covered a lot of conflicts in my career. The patterns repeat. The organizations that cause the most suffering aren't usually the ones wearing their villainy openly. They're the ones absolutely convinced of their own righteousness. Synanon believed it was saving the world. By the end, it was terrorizing it, and almost nobody saw it coming until it was too late. The files are still public. The court documents, the testimonies from people who lived through it. They are warnings written in ink and pain, and they are reminders that the line between salvation and damnation isn't always clear until you're already on the wrong side of it. Subscribe for more deep dives into how movements meant to heal became machines of control, cases that rewrote what we thought we knew about power and belief.